Someone says something that makes your blood run cold. Not because you didn't see it coming, but because it landed in public, in front of colleagues, in front of family, in front of people whose opinion of you matters. And in that split second, every instinct you have is firing at once. Fight. Defend. Strike back. And here is the brutal truth that nobody tells you about those instincts. Following them is exactly what the other person is counting on. Every dismissal, every interruption, every cutting remark delivered in a group setting has one objective. Not to communicate. Not to resolve. To provoke a reaction. Because the moment you react emotionally, you have handed them something far more valuable than the argument. You have handed them control. In the next few minutes, I am going to show you 5 responses, not scripts, not tricks, a philosophy of engagement that the Stoics practiced for over 2,000 years. The third one is the one most people never consider, because it looks, on the surface, like the weakest move you could possibly make. And it is, in practice, the most powerful. Stay with me until the end. By the time you understand why it works, you will never handle conflict the same way again. The framework. Why most people lose before they open their mouth. Before we get into the 5 responses, it is worth understanding something that changes everything about how you approach conflict. Most people walk into confrontations believing the goal is to win, to have the better argument, the sharper comeback, the moment that makes the other person fall silent first. But here is what Epictetus, a man who was born into slavery and rose to become one of the most influential minds in Western philosophy, understood about human conflict that almost nobody in a boardroom or family dinner has figured out. You do not lose a conflict when someone says something unkind to you. You lose it the moment you decide their behavior gets to determine your internal state. That is not a philosophical abstraction. That is a practical operating principle. Think about the physics of provocation. When someone attacks you, publicly, privately, in a meeting, at a dinner table, they are making a bet. They are betting that you will respond in one of 2 predictable ways. You will fight back, which validates the confrontation and gives them energy to continue. Or you will retreat, which signals that the territory they challenged is worth challenging again. What genuinely disrupts the pattern? What makes the provocateur suddenly find themselves without a target is a person who simply does not take the bet, who receives the comment, processes it, and responds from a place so grounded that the escalation they were counting on simply never materializes. The 5 responses below are all, at their core, different methods of not taking that bet. Different ways of staying so rooted in your own sense of self that someone else's attempt to destabilize you lands on bedrock instead of on moving ground. Response 1. I see your point. Help me understand your reasoning. There is a particular kind of person in every professional environment, perhaps in every social environment, who specializes in the vague attack. Not the specific, substantive critique that you can actually engage with and learn from. The vague attack. This isn't realistic. You clearly don't understand the market. I'm not sure you've thought this through. Words that carry enormous weight in a group setting but, when you press them for specificity, tend to dissolve into nothing. These attacks are specifically designed to be hard to answer. Because if you defend yourself, you look defensive. If you ask for clarification, you look uncertain. The person making the attack has engineered a situation where any visible reaction you have seems to confirm their point. The only response that actually disrupts this dynamic is one that the Stoics would immediately recognize as turning the Socratic method on the attacker. When someone levels a vague critique at you, in public, in a meeting, in a social setting, You respond with complete calm and genuine-sounding curiosity. I see your point. Can you help me understand your reasoning? Which specific aspects concern you? What you are doing here is something psychologically precise. You are forcing the person to convert their emotional statement into a rational one. You are asking them to move from the comfortable vagueness of attack into the discomfort of specificity. And for the vast majority of people who attack vaguely, because vagueness protects them, because they have not actually thought their criticism through, this is a move they are entirely unprepared for. I watched this dynamic play out in a professional setting a few years ago. A colleague had spent weeks building a proposal, research, market data, detailed projections. 3 minutes into her presentation, someone interrupted. This seems really out of touch with what's actually happening in the market right now. She didn't flinch. She looked at him calmly and said, "That's a fair concern to raise. Which specific elements feel misaligned to you?" The silence that followed was revealing. He looked at his notes. He started to speak, stopped, started again. Eventually, with the entire room watching, he said something like, "I suppose I haven't read through the full document yet." She nodded. Said nothing further. Continued her presentation. By the end, he was nodding along like everyone else. The power of this response is not in the words themselves. It is in what those words communicate at a deeper level. They say, "I am not threatened by your criticism. I am curious about it. And if your criticism has substance, I am willing to engage with it. But if it does not, I am comfortable letting that become apparent to everyone in the room." There is a reason Socrates was considered the most dangerous man in Athens. Not because he argued louder than anyone else. Because he asked better questions. When you use this response correctly, with genuine tone, without a hint of sarcasm, with actual openness to being wrong, you access the same dynamic. You transform yourself from a target into the person leading the conversation. The crucial caveat here, your tone, is everything. If this response is delivered with even a trace of condescension, it becomes an attack. The words are the same. The result is completely different. This only works when you are genuinely asking. Which means, and this is the deeper Stoic lesson, you need to actually be the kind of person who can hear genuine criticism without being threatened by it. The response is only available to you if the internal orientation is already there. Practice. The next time you receive vague criticism in any setting, resist the urge to defend. Instead, ask one precise follow-up question. Notice what happens. Response 2. You're absolutely right. Here's what I'm going to do about it. This is the response that feels most counterintuitive. Because everything in us resists it. When someone criticizes us, especially in front of others, the instinct is to explain, to contextualize, to present the evidence of our good faith, our hard work, the circumstances that made the outcome what it was. We want to be understood before we are judged. That impulse is deeply human. It is also, almost always, strategically wrong. Here's why. When someone criticizes you and you defend yourself, you are entering their frame. You are accepting the premise that the conversation is about whether they were right to criticize you. And that conversation is very difficult to win, even when you are in the right, because the very act of defending yourself looks like you are more invested in protecting your ego than in solving the problem. Whereas when you look at someone who has just criticized you, in front of a client, in front of your team, in front of an audience, and you say, without hesitation, "You're absolutely right. Here's what I'm going to do about it." Something happens in the room that cannot be manufactured any other way. The energy shifts. Completely. Instantly. I experienced this firsthand during one of the more uncomfortable professional moments of my career. We had been engaged with a client for 6 months, and there had been delays, real ones, not imaginary ones, caused by genuine complexity. But delays nonetheless. And the client called them out. Publicly. In front of my entire team. Every instinct I had told me to explain. The scope changes. The technical challenges. The resource constraints that had nothing to do with our effort or our commitment. All of which were true. Instead, I looked directly at the client and said, "You're absolutely right. And here's what I'm going to do about it. I'm implementing a project tracking system this week that will give everyone visibility into potential delays before they become delays. I'll be sending weekly updates every Friday. And I'm personally taking ownership of this project's timeline starting today." The posture in the room changed. Shoulders dropped. The client uncrossed their arms. And the rest of the meeting was not a defense hearing. It was a collaboration. We left with a plan and a relationship that was, if anything, stronger for having had the conversation. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it." Taking immediate responsibility, without excuses, without preamble, embodies something that explanation never can. The security of a person who is more interested in solving problems than in protecting their ego. The crucial caveat: this only works when the criticism is actually valid. If someone is attacking you unfairly, if the criticism is not rooted in reality, this response would be a capitulation rather than a strategy. The power comes specifically from choosing this response when you could defend yourself and don't. That choice communicates something extraordinary. It says, "I am not afraid of being wrong. My worth does not depend on being right. And I am more committed to the outcome than I am to my image." People who encounter that quality in someone rarely forget it. Response 3. That's an interesting perspective. What made you think of that? This is the response that most people never consider. And the reason they don't consider it is that it looks, on the surface, like the weakest move available. Someone makes a cutting, dismissive, or outright insulting comment about you. And your response is to express curiosity about why they said it? That feels wrong. It feels like you are absorbing the blow instead of deflecting it. It feels like you are giving the other person permission to continue. What actually happens is almost the opposite. The insight here comes from understanding what a provocative comment actually requires to survive. It needs your reaction. Not necessarily an angry reaction, just a visible one. A reaction means the comment landed, which validates the effort of making it, which creates the conditions for the provocation to continue. Remove the reaction. Replace it with a question that sounds genuinely curious, that asks the person to trace their reasoning back to its source, and you have done something far more sophisticated than firing back a clever response. You have put the comment under a spotlight and asked its creator to explain it. Most people who make provocative statements in social settings have not thought through why they are making them. They are operating from emotion, from assumption, from some unexamined bias or insecurity that has attached itself to the situation. When you ask them to articulate the reasoning behind their comment, you are forcing them to do something they were never expecting to do. Sometimes they will realize, mid-explanation, that they have nothing to say, that the comment was empty, that they were reacting from a feeling rather than a position. And watching that realization arrive, in front of an audience, is one of the more instructive things you can witness. I was told about a dinner party where this played out almost perfectly. A woman, a freelance designer who had built a very successful independent practice, was at a table with someone she had just met who said, with that particular cocktail of condescension and fake joviality, "Freelancing must be nice." Basically getting paid to play on a computer without any real responsibility. She smiled, genuinely, not tightly, and said, "That's an interesting take." What made you think of it that way? He stumbled, tried to find something to say that wasn't immediately self-incriminating. Eventually said something along the lines of, "I suppose I don't actually know much about what the work involves." The entire table had just watched him reveal himself. Not because she attacked him, because she simply invited him to explain himself, and the explanation exposed the comment for what it was. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." This response is that principle in practice. While the provocateur is trying to pull you down to the level of reactivity, you remain at the level of curiosity. The contrast becomes visible, and the person who arrived at the table confident in their superiority often leaves having shown everyone exactly the kind of person they are. There is one technical requirement that makes or breaks this response. Your tone must be genuinely curious. Not arch. Not loaded. Not performing innocence while radiating contempt. If there is any edge in your voice, the question becomes a weapon and the dynamic shifts back into confrontation. The sophistication of this response is that it requires you to actually have developed some equanimity about the comment you just received. Which is, again, the deeper Stoic point. You can only ask this question cleanly if, at some level, you are not devastated by what was said. And you only get there through the internal work, through the practice of recognizing that your self-worth is not located in someone else's opinion of you. When that is genuinely true for you, the question becomes natural. Because you are actually curious. You actually want to understand what made them say that. Not because you need to defend yourself, but because you have genuinely removed the emotional stakes, and now the interaction is just interesting. That is what it looks like when someone has internalized Stoic philosophy rather than just read about it. Response 4. I appreciate you sharing that with me. Nothing in the landscape of conflict disarms quite like unexpected gratitude. We are all, to varying degrees, conditioned to brace for the counterattack. When we approach someone with criticism, especially when we have been building the frustration for some time, especially when we are doing it in a way that is not entirely composed, we have mentally rehearsed the conversation. We know, or think we know, how they will respond. They will get defensive. They will make excuses. They will turn it back on us. They will tell us we are being unreasonable. When instead what they say is, "I appreciate you sharing that with me," and they mean it, and their body language carries it, and there is no trace of sarcasm in their voice, something genuinely unexpected happens in the nervous system of the person who just came in hot. The prepared script has no scene for this response. The emotional posture that was ready for a fight suddenly has nothing to push against. And in that gap, something usually softens. I saw this dynamic at work in a situation that had all the ingredients to go very badly. A neighbor, clearly having reached the end of his patience, came over in the evening in a state of contained anger and confronted the dog owner next door about noise during the early morning hours. He was not composed. He was already at 11. He said words like "the whole neighborhood" and calling animal control, and the energy behind them was the energy of someone who had rehearsed this conversation several times and was finally releasing it. The response he received was, "I really appreciate you coming to tell me directly. I had absolutely no idea this was happening. I'm genuinely glad you felt comfortable enough to bring it to me rather than just letting the frustration build." The transformation in his posture was almost physical. Something in the confrontation that had been coiled released. And the conversation that followed, the two of them talking through solutions, exchanging numbers, making a plan, was completely different from the one he had prepared for. This response works because it does something psychologically sophisticated. It finds the legitimate concern underneath the aggressive delivery and responds to that concern rather than to the aggression. It says, implicitly, I can hear what you actually need through how you are expressing it. I am not going to react to the packaging. I am going to respond to the content. Seneca wrote about the discipline of seeing through the surface of situations to what is actually being asked for. Most aggressive criticism, he understood, is not really aggression, it is frustrated need. Someone is expressing pain in the only way they currently know how to express it. When you respond to the pain rather than the expression, you create the conditions for something that the aggression itself was never going to produce, an actual resolution. There is an important distinction to preserve here. This response is not appropriate for every situation. If someone is attacking you unfairly, making accusations that have no basis, using aggressive language to manipulate or intimidate, receiving that with gratitude would be a misapplication of this principle. The response works specifically in situations where the underlying concern is legitimate even if the delivery is not. Your skill lies in distinguishing between the two. But in the many situations where someone is expressing a real frustration in an imperfect way, this response does something remarkable. It treats them as a person of better nature than they are currently showing, and in doing so, it often calls that better nature forward. You will be surprised how often the person who arrived as an adversary leaves as an ally. Response 5. Silence. Thank you for that insight. We have arrived at the one that requires the most from you. Not because the words are complicated. There are 5 of them, and the 5th response also requires something that happens before any of them, a pause. A deliberate, conscious, unhurried pause, during which you make eye contact and say nothing. The setup: someone has said something that crosses a clear line. Not vague provocation, a direct, public, unmistakable attempt to undermine you in front of an audience. The kind of comment that makes the room go quiet because everyone can feel what just happened. Every instinct you have is focused on the same question: how do I recover from this? But the premise of that question is wrong, because you have not lost anything yet. The only thing that determines whether that comment does damage is how you respond in the next few seconds. You stop. You do not look away. You hold the gaze of the person who made the comment, not in threat, not in challenge, not with visible anger, in something that is closer to patient observation. And you let the silence run. 3 seconds. 4. Long enough that the room understands. This is not a pause while you gather yourself. This is a choice. And then, calmly, without sarcasm, thank you for that insight. And you continue. The mechanics of why this works are worth understanding in some depth, because they are less obvious than with the other 4 responses. When someone makes a cutting public comment, the comment is designed to redirect the audience's attention from the subject at hand to you and your reaction. The attack is a diversion. Its success depends entirely on whether you give the audience something to watch. If you get angry, they watch your anger. If you stumble, they watch your discomfort. If you defend yourself, they watch the debate. In every case, the comment has achieved its goal. It has made you the story. The pause changes the direction of the spotlight. During those seconds of silence, the room is not watching you struggle. They are sitting with the comment that was just made. They are hearing it again in the silence, without the forward momentum of the conversation carrying them past it. And what they tend to hear, when they have that moment to hear it clearly, is how inappropriate it was. Your response, thank you for that insight, does not give them ammunition to continue. It does not confirm that the comment achieved its goal. It does the opposite. It treats the comment as if it were a minor contribution to the discussion, which is, in the minds of everyone watching, a devastating reframe. I know of a situation where this played out in a high-stakes professional context, a competitive business presentation, the kind where everyone in the room knew each other and knew exactly what was happening when a competitor decided to make a comment about the presenter's experience mid-presentation. The comment was designed to rattle. It was designed to make everyone question what they were listening to. Instead, the presenter stopped, made eye contact, let the silence run, and then, "Thank you for that insight," continued the presentation. Got the contract. Several people approached afterward to say they had been impressed not by the comeback. There was no comeback, but by the composure. By the visible demonstration that the comment had not landed on someone who was uncertain about themselves. By the contrast between the aggressor's energy and the presenter's stillness. Epictetus. It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. This response is that principle at its most crystalline. You cannot control what someone says in a room full of people. You can control whether what they say gets to define the next 5 minutes. And the pause, followed by 5 words delivered with complete calm, is the most powerful available demonstration that you are the one making that choice, not them. The technical requirement, genuine tone. Not sarcasm. Not performance. If "thank you for that insight" sounds like what it would sound like if someone's eyes were rolling while they said it, it becomes something else entirely. The words only work when they are delivered as if you actually mean them, which is to say, when you have done enough internal work that you are not devastated by the comment, and you can receive it with something close to actual equanimity. Which brings us back, what all 5 responses have in common. Run back through them. The curious question. The immediate acknowledgment. The invitation to self-explanation. The unexpected gratitude. The pause and the 5 words. They are different in tone, in structure, in the situations they are designed for. But they share a single underlying architecture. None of them require you to win the argument. None of them require a perfect comeback. None of them require you to be louder, sharper, more cutting, or more confrontational than the person who initiated the conflict. Every single one operates on the same principle that Marcus Aurelius returned to, night after night, in the private journals he never intended anyone else to read. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The person who dismisses you in a meeting is not the problem. The comment made at your expense in a family gathering is not the problem. The competitor who tries to undermine you in a presentation is not the problem. What determines the outcome, in every one of these situations, is the question of who is in control of your response. When that person is you, when you have done enough internal work that your equilibrium does not depend on how others treat you in a given moment, the 5 responses above become available naturally. Not as scripts you memorize. Not as techniques you perform. As genuine expressions of a person who simply does not take the bait. Marcus Aurelius wrote about a concept he called prosoche, sustained, attentive awareness of your own inner state. Not reactive awareness. Not awareness that kicks in after you have already said something you regret. But the kind of ongoing, practiced, habitual self-observation that creates a perceptible gap between stimulus and response. Between what happens to you and what you do about it. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and came out the other side with one of the most durable insights in modern psychology, described the same gap in different language. Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Neither man was talking about suppression, about bottling the emotion until it explodes somewhere else. They were talking about the development, through practice, through daily attention, through small repeated choices, of a genuine internal stability that does not require external conditions to maintain itself. That is what these 5 responses point toward. Not a set of tools. A way of being. One that is available to anyone willing to do the quiet, unglamorous work of attending to their own reactions, not in the high-stakes moments, but in the small ones. Especially in the small ones. The research is consistent. The people who handle conflict most effectively are not the ones who have the best comebacks. They are the ones who have spent the most time understanding why certain things trigger them, and doing the work to expand the space between trigger and reaction. Every conversation in which you apply one of these responses, however imperfectly, is a repetition. Every small moment in which you choose the curious question over the defensive explanation, the acknowledgement over the excuse, the pause over the impulse, that is a repetition. And repetitions build structure. Over time, the structure becomes character. Over time, character becomes the thing that precedes you into a room before you have said a single word. That is what genuine, lasting respect actually looks like from the inside. Not status granted by others. A standard maintained by yourself. Life is too short to keep reshaping yourself into whatever form keeps the room comfortable. Stand where you are. Hold your ground quietly. Let your responses, consistently, without drama, without announcement, accumulate into a reputation that does not need to argue for itself. That is usually enough. Now, I want to know which of these 5 responses is the one you needed to hear today. Not which one sounds most impressive. The one that landed for you personally because of something specific that has happened in your life recently. Drop the number in the comments. Just the number. The people reading them will know exactly what you mean.